Hello. It's fair to say one story has dominated the news agenda this week.
This is the biggest recall of patients ever in Northern Ireland.
In order to ensure you're receiving the best possible care and treatment, I'm inviting you to an appointment with another consultant neurologist.
Whilst we hope that this will only affect a very small number of patients, the change of diagnosis could potentially be very significant.
I think the cat was like, in a sense, like mushrooms. We just didn't know what was happening.
I was convinced I had MS, but Dr. Watt said, put it out of your head, forget about it.
And I believed him. And now I'm devastated.
Well, as 2,500 neurology patients treated by Dr. Michael Watt are recalled amid fears some may have been misdiagnosed, there's growing criticism tonight of the way the Belfast Trust has handled the crisis. Joining me now are the SDLP MLA Nicola Mallon, who's been in contact with the Belfast Trust over concerns about Dr. Watt since last December, and Dr. Gabriel Scally, a former Director of Public Health here, who's now based in England. Welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Nichola Mallon, first of all, when did you first become aware there could be a problem here?
I became aware at the beginning of December last year. A number of Dr. Watt's patients who were on a waiting list for a medical procedure, an epidural blood patch procedure, had received letters informing them that they were subject to review. On the back of that, a number of patients approached me and I made some inquiries on their behalf. I didn't get a satisfactory response. The patients weren't getting a satisfactory response when they were asking for information about this review, whether they were part of it. So on the 3rd of December, I sent a number of very detailed questions to the Belfast Trust about the nature and remit of this review, the status of Dr. Watt, because in the correspondence back it became clear to me that Dr. Watt had no longer been in post from June. I asked about assurances that no harm had been caused to patients, the communication with patients and so forth. And both the patients and I felt that we were just basically banging our heads against a brick wall, and alarm bells then started to ring.
So you were aware of it since December 2017. We know that the Belfast Trust was aware of a potential problem since December 2016. That was a whole year earlier. And there are concerns now that there may have been problems going back as far as 2011. Do you believe that to be the case?
Well, certainly there is a complaint in the public domain. It's there for all to see, dating to 2011. I have seen formal correspondence, a formal complaint that's been lodged with the Belfast Trust dating back to 2010 involving this doctor. So I certainly think there are concerns and there are formal complaints in the system that date back much earlier than December 2016.
So you're talking there about a second formal complaint, not the one that has previously been in the public domain.
No,
a separate one which goes back, in fact, to before that.
Yes, to the period, it begins in the period of 2010.
Gabriel Scally, you've been following the story from Bristol. What do you make of the unfolding situation?
Well, it is continuing to emerge, isn't it? And it's, in my experience of a lot of these serious clinical problems, it's very rare for them to emerge in the way this one has, with patients having to go to an elected politician in order to have their concerns addressed. And it's good to see that the Trust is now putting in place efforts to review those patients and make sure that they have been given good care, and if they haven't, that they are given it from now on. But there does also need to be, I think, a very serious look at when the concerns with this particular doctor's clinical practice emerged, how they have been dealt with since they first emerged, and whether this doctor was involved in good systems of clinical audit, and when there were adverse reports or adverse incidents in terms of diagnosis, how those were reported, who knew about them, and how they were dealt with. And I think it's really important for patient confidence, for public confidence, that it becomes clear very quickly what the full range of action that is being taken.
Because it does seem, Gabriel Scally, that the wheels have been turning very slowly. Nichola Mallon's made it very clear she's known about this since December last year. The Trust has known since December the year before. We are now hearing about 2 formal complaints that have been in the system since 2010 and 2011. One would have to wonder why perhaps the red flag hadn't gone up at a much earlier stage.
Well, one shouldn't jump to conclusions too much about complaints. Patients quite rightly complain about doctors all the time, and it will be a very rare clinician indeed that doesn't have a patient dissatisfied at some stage during their clinical career. It's when it starts to emerge as a pattern that there were concerns maybe from other colleagues, when there were a number of complaints that were really quite serious, or when there became quite a number of complaints and out of the usual number of complaints. And the only way to get to the bottom of that is to have a good, and I think in terms of restoring confidence, a good external review of that. And I would hope that that is what the Trust and the Department of Health are talking about now, because that's clearly what needs to happen.
Yeah, well, in terms of how things go forward, Nichola Mallon, we know that there is going to be an RQIA review ordered into certain aspects of this case by the department. We know the GMC is going to look at particular aspects of this situation as well. I want to talk in a bit more detail about the patients in a moment, but insofar as we can discuss what's happening at this stage, now that it is in the public domain, are you satisfied with the way the authorities are dealing with the situation now that you have brought it to the public's attention?
Well, I think serious questions have to be asked about the speed with which the Trust has responded to this. And even if we accept that the first complaints were really raised in December 2016, Dr. Watt was removed from post in June 2017, and yet almost a year later, patients are only being told and the recall's taking place. I think that raises huge questions. There's also huge questions about the lack of communication with patients. I know of patients who have submitted subject access requests. They've felt that they have had to get their information. 3 months have passed and they still haven't got it. Others have received their files, but notes are missing. So there are huge questions there for me. I think it is good that the clinics are up and running. I know that they've already started to see people. They've seen some of the patients who have come to me. I think that is a positive move, because the priority here has to be making sure the patients have the right diagnosis, the right treatment, and they're on the right management plan. But Mark, we also have to ask ourselves, how did this situation arise? It seems to me that the normal red flagging system did not apply for whatever reason in this case. Separate governance and new governance arrangements need to be put in place to assure patients that this kind of thing does not happen again. And the third thing is we need to have a serious look at our neurology services. One doctor having a patient load of 3,200 raises serious concerns about safety to me, and I think we need to look at the resourcing and the organisation of neurology in the Belfast Trust.
So you are combining there Dr. Michael Watt's private patient list with his NHS list?
That's his sole NHS list. That's without counting the patients within this private sector that he was also seeing. So
that's a lot of people. I mean, Gabriel Scally, can I ask you, does that number feel about right to you, or does it seem like a very heavy caseload for one man to be dealing with?
Well, it's hard to tell, because I think what we're looking at is over quite a period of time, so it's quite possible. But could I make one point, Mark, about it, that it's for the Department of Health to make sure that there's no real distinction made between the patients who are seen privately in a clinic or publicly in the NHS. There's still people in Northern Ireland who have a right to expect high quality clinical care, irrespective of the institution, private or public, in which it's delivered. So there are issues for the department about what is happening in the private sector, as well as what is happening in the public sector.
We did ask for the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Health to join us on the programme tonight. We also invited the Chief Medical Officer to take part in the discussion tonight. Both men declined. Would you like to see, Gabriel Scally, those individuals coming out onto a public platform to reassure members of the public at this stage?
Well, all of the NHS bodies are accountable to the Department of Health. If there are questions about how those bodies have performed their duties, it's up to the department to reassure the public and to take a lead. And I would be very disappointed, extremely disappointed, if the Department of Health was not looking very, very closely at how the Trust was handling this issue now that it's become such a public issue of confidence. And everything should be being approved by the Department of Health. They are the backstop here, ultimately. And they've got a job to do to make sure that what happens now, both in terms of the clinical care, but also the extensive review of what happened and how it was handled, that falls very clearly at the remit, within the remit of the Department of Health and the Permanent Secretary and the Chief Medical Officer. Yes, they should be saying what the department is doing. It's not just up to the Trust, or it's not just up to the Ulster Clinic or wherever else Dr. Watt was seeing patients.
Well, I think in statements issued by the department, it has made clear that it is instructing the next stages, and the Belfast Trust has had individuals on the airwaves actually explaining its position. Nichola Mallon, would you like to see some of those individuals, in the absence of a health minister, actually in person reassuring the patients who have approached you and members of the public more widely, not directly affected by this, but who may have concerns generally for the way in which the health services is actually functioning at the moment?
Well, patients should be able to look to a health minister and a health committee to be scrutinising this situation and to be making sure that people who are responsible are brought forward and held to account, and to get reassurances that this will never happen again. In the absence of that, then most certainly we need to be hearing, patients need to be hearing from people in senior positions, the Permanent Secretary and others, because the patient's at the heart of this. And it's the 2,500 who've been recalled, but also all of those patients who were ever under this doctor's care have had their confidence shattered, their trust stolen. And I believe it's a wider issue of public confidence now, because everywhere I'm going, people, even if they weren't patients, they're frightened by this. They're wondering, is this happening elsewhere? So they need to hear from people. People need to come out and explain clearly how this has happened, but also reassure them that they're doing everything they can to prevent something like this happening again. Have you had conversations with people in the Department of Health, in the Belfast Trust, to reassure you that they are sufficiently across their brief and taking this matter as seriously as it clearly needs to be taken? Well, since December, I've sent several emails to the Belfast Trust. I also requested meetings on behalf of distressed patients before this came out. I asked for a copy of the investigation report, to no avail. On the morning of the day the story broke, I got a phone call from the Chief Executive of the Belfast Trust, and I'm now meeting the Chief Executive and the senior team tomorrow. I find that deeply regrettable, that this interaction and this access is only happening after the event. What are you going to be saying at that meeting tomorrow? Well, I'll be passing on the concerns of the patients. I'll be asking why, when I was asking those questions, did I not receive any answers. I'll be wanting to know, was December 2016 the first time the concerns were raised? I want to know when they're going to fully communicate with patients. I'm going to ask them, is the 12 weeks long enough? And I'm going to ask them, what are they doing with the Department of Health to ensure that we get away from a situation where neurology patients are sitting with the longest waiting times, the highest number, and they're clearly not being properly serviced because it's not properly resourced or organised. That's the fundamental question, even if we take it aside from the situation involving this individual doctor. Can I just ask you very, very quickly on this one, why did those patients, Gabriel Scally's already said it's a very unusual situation that we're facing at the moment, where patients have actually approached an elected representative to bring forward their concerns to the powers that be. Why did those individuals approach you and seek to have their issues addressed in this way, do you think? Because they weren't getting information from the Trust, but also they were running to their GPs. Their GPs didn't know what to do, and in a number of cases the GPs were suggesting that they contact their MLA. So this is how deep this was running and the confusion that was there. But ultimately, Gabriel is absolutely right. I mean, I'll do whatever I can to serve my constituents, but no patient should be running to an elected representative to get information about them that they're entitled to know. You're nodding your head, Gabriel Scally. Does it look to you from Bristol like there's some kind of serious democratic deficit here which is potentially impacting on healthcare provision in Northern Ireland? We don't have a health minister. We don't have a health committee where people like Nichola Mallon could raise these issues in a public forum. Is that unusual and potentially quite damaging to people in Northern Ireland, do you think?
Well, I think what there is, Mark, is a leadership deficit. who is standing up when these issues arise in the Northern Ireland Health Service and providing the leadership? And what you're seeing, I think, there seems to me to be a pattern of delay here and a pattern of non-engagement with patients and non-engagement with the public. And certainly in all my career, and having dealt with very many serious clinical incidents, what's really important is that the health service leaders or the civil service leaders who have responsibility, who are in well-paid public jobs, protecting and securing the health of the population, stand up and tell people what's happening and take some leadership responsibility. So I'll not comment on the current democratic deficit, but there is clearly, in my view, a leadership deficit.
Can I ask you one final question, Gabriel Scally? We've got 3 parallel health scares at the same time, here in Northern Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland and in England. Is that just a coincidence, or is there something else happening that we should be concerned about, do you think?
Well, I think there are a couple of things happening. Health services across Britain and Ireland are under enormous financial pressure. Waiting lists are growing, and the concentration is not where it should be. The concentration is on budget deficits. It's in trying to get enough money, and it's trying to deal with patients as best they can. And in that situation, quality of care and clinicians taking responsibility for their own care of patients and a wider clinical responsibility to make sure their colleagues are dealing well with patients, that seems to me to be taking a lower rank order of priority. And the second point is, I think unfortunately we've moved to an inspectoral system where health bodies and sometimes clinicians are seeing it as someone else's responsibility to oversee the care and to see if anything goes wrong. No, the responsibility really rests with the medical professionals and other professionals who are treating patients to secure the best quality care. And I do think some of the shifts that have taken place over the last 10 years are leading us into a situation where we may unfortunately see many more of these really serious issues about quality of care, financial reasons and leadership, and particularly clinical leadership issues.
Gabriel Scally in Bristol, thank you very much indeed. Nichola Mallon, you will let us know how that meeting goes tomorrow.
Yes, and Mark, can I just say, there is a deficit when it comes to leadership and democratic accountability, because in the last weeks alone, we uncovered, the SDLP, that there was a benefits blunder worth £24 million unpaid to people. We have now uncovered this. These are huge questions, and I really am fearful because I sadly believe that this won't be the last.
OK, we will leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us.